This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is The Ride, Paul Revere and the Night That Saved America. April 18th, 1775 was the date a Boston-based silversmith, engraver, and staunch anti-British political operative named Paul Revere set out on the most famous horse ride in American history. A century later, it inspired the poem and legend of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. But the story is deeper and richer than we've all assumed. Acclaimed writer and editor Kostya Kennedy, through extraordinary and extensive research, has uncovered new and enlightening information on that amazing, including the women who were involved and African Americans in Boston event presented now in this new book, The Ride, Paul Revere and the Night That Saved America. Kostya Kennedy is an editor at Dotdash, Meredith, and a former senior writer at Sports Illustrated. He is the author of the New York Times bestselling 56, Joe DiMaggio, and The Last Magic Number in Sports, Pete Rose, An American Dilemma, and True, The Four Seasons of Jackie Robinson. All three won the Casey Award for Best Baseball Book of the Year. He is taught at Columbia University and NYU, makes his home in Westchester County, New York. Happy to have Kostya Kennedy join me here on Speaking of Writers. And by the way, Kostya, appropriate, even though this is not a baseball book, full disclosure, we are recording this on opening day. Welcome.
Opening day. It's a national holiday, right?
It
We're
is.
working on a holiday here.
It is. Well, welcome.
Thank you. It's
So,
great to be on with you, Steve.
you had the baseball books. Why Paul Revere and this ride as a subject for you?
Well, two ways to answer. It's a good question. One thing, the books you mentioned there and those figures, DiMaggio, Jackie Robinson, Rose, they're all figures that really slip the bounds of the game. So the books are not meant to be entirely balls and strikes. It's the summer of 1941, or it's Brooklyn in 47, and there's a lot of different aspects to the story. So that translated pretty well to sort of a broader story. I found it sort of nice and very comfortable in terms of my research and reporting and writing to go to this subject. He's always been Paul Revere now such a it's sort of stuck in my craw a little bit as a writer. You think about subjects over your time of your career as someone who had a lot of appeal to me. I think intellectually, sort of the idea of somebody who met the moment so spectacularly, like he knew what time it was in his life, he knew what time it was for the beginnings of this revolution, and over the course of a few hours, at incredible personal risk and danger, and executed, met the task, and built his legacy and shaped the American future. And that was really that probably from a writing standpoint was the most compelling thing. Last thing I'll just say quickly is just emotionally, as many people have heard the poem, Listen, My Children, and You Shall Hear the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. I remember being read that when I was certainly old enough to read, but loved being read to 9 or 10. And my mother reading it out of a big red volume that had no pictures in it. And so it left to my imagination. It's always been a blessing to sort of think about what might have happened that night. And for whatever reason, certain stories stay with you. And so in that sense, it stayed with me. And then the other things I talked about on sort of a deeper sort of professional sense, and thinking that there must be, and soon found out there was a lot more to the story.
We'll talk about the research in a moment here. By the way, this year marks the 250th anniversary of the ride. So, why was Revere the go-to rider for the revolution?
So he was just very he was very close to Samuel Adams and John Adams, John Hancock, Joseph Warren, the sort of core brains behind the operation and the money behind the operation. And he became they had a network called of express riders that Samuel Adams had put together. They already had what were called post riders. If you wanted to send a letter to somebody in New York, you could do that anytime. But these express riders started sort of in a time when the revolution was in its sort of embryonic stages as a way to get messages out quickly about things. So in 1773, after the Boston Tea Party, it was Revere who they asked to go south and tell people in Hartford, New York, Philadelphia what had happened. He just emerged as this really reliable, good person they could count on, very trustworthy, really good on riding a horse, and also good, Steve, at sort of telling the information without a lot of giving you what you needed to know without a lot of extra and without not enough. Which is a talent in itself, and we all encounter that in our lives. People who can't do it, but John Adams at one point sent a letter to somebody, and he just said, "Paul Revere will give you the news." And he meant that in like we trust this guy to be an emissary for what we're telling. And yeah, and then physically he would, when he went down to Philadelphia, he'd go back up and back in, 7 days or something, 350 miles each way on several horses. Not easy. So a lot of things came, he had a combination of physical ability, right temperament, lots of energy, intelligence that made him the right guy for this.
All right, let's talk about some of the fresh primary and secondary research. I know you walked in Revere's footsteps of this great historical sites in Boston, even out on Cape Cod too.
Yeah.
Um, and you talked to a lot of people. What were some of the new sources here that you uncovered?
Well, I found some sort of there were from a sort of documentary aspect. There were diaries, letters, newspapers, reports, some of which have been certainly seen before in the basis of other things, some of which have been like very lightly used or needed a little more interpretation. So some of it was like kind of library research, but it's still very cool. You're suddenly sitting there. In one case, I had to get special dispensation and put on gloves, but you're actually holding a newspaper that was on the streets in February of 1775. It's a really incredible thing, and no pictures or anything, really just a one sheet of tiny little type. So there were those things, and then sort of more contemporary or relating to, I spent some time with Paul Revere the third. He's actually the fifth great grandson, but they weren't all named Paul. That would really ins inspiring and sort of shape some of my perspective. You mentioned I went out to Truro and Cape Cod where the boat, the Somerset, shipwrecked, and the Somerset with the boat was in the harbor on the night that Paul Revere had to get through the harbor, get out from Boston. And maybe one of the most compelling things I did was go up to the very top of the Old North Church
Mm.
in Boston. It's a tourist site where you can go on a tour and you go up, I think, one and a half levels kind of. But the other part is not open to the public. I had to again apply for and get granted up there. Took a little bit of asking and finagling, but I got escorted up there. And I really felt that, though it's changed a little bit, the steeple got blown off, but the main structure is essentially the same, and the steeple was replaced by the same kind of steeple. And I really felt the experience of going up there. We say, "Oh, go put a couple lanterns in the church." It wasn't that simple. Somebody had to go up hand over hand in a ladder with lanterns wrapped, heavy lanterns over their back, and a tinder box to light it when they got up there. It just felt really like I was in the moment. There's a little bit of light they have now and there, some strung light, but essentially it was dark. It's not insulated. It was cold, and the wind was whipping through, and could really feel like you were there. And then when you get to the top, and obviously it's not the same as it was in 1775. There's cars down the street. There's a basketball game going on at the Y,
Mhm.
but you can see the bend in the Carl River. In the Charles River. Sorry, you can see Charlestown across the way where Revere landed. You can see the old cemetery. Much of it is very much the same. So there were some moments like that and a few others that really kind of brought me back into the time and place.
Yeah, the you mentioned the Charles River, the line the sea in one if by land, two if by sea is referring to the Charles River.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a lot, people talk about the Longfellow poem. It's actually it's very factual and very truth-based. There are some small word things and a few things he did, thank goodness for poetic effect, that it made it so much of a better poem. But it wasn't actually sea. They were, as you point, they came across the Charles River at a different point than Revere did.
And Revere was that night was rowed quietly over the Charles River from Boston to Charlestown. There were other riders that night too, right?
Yeah, so there was, well, there was just two that went from Boston. One was Revere, of course, and the other was a man named William Dawes who went out by land. Um, equally brave and courageous as Revere. For whatever reason, and this may be partly because Paul Revere really knew a lot of people in the area. He was really experienced at this in a way that Dawes may not have been. Dawes, who also ended up in Lexington where Revere did, to meet Hancock and Samuel Adams, didn't seem to have alerted anybody on the way. There was no, and the next day, the next morning, I should say, just hours later in Lexington and Concord, there weren't people from the towns where Dawes had gone through who were there at the battlefield. Not sure exactly what happened, but it didn't seem to have been an effective ride. But from where Revere went in Charlestown and got hit on his horse, he started alerting people, and they started alerting other people, and then people got on other horses and went to this town and that town. And you can imagine this sort of neural network going across the land, getting out there and telling people. And that's how it is, Steve, that the Patriots had hundreds and then thousands of people finally in Concord and Lexington and along the road there by the next morning, because there's no way that one man or a couple of people could have gotten that kind of word out. It needed a network of people.
You mentioned as part of the research there were letters and diaries. So was he a big letter writer?
Not he himself. There were some. There were definitely some from him, and he had to give some depositions about the night immediately after, and then later on. But it was a lot of just sort of what I tried to do in this book is everything I include. It's not meant to be all known thought on Paul Revere, but it's meant to be everything in service of the ride and in service of that event. And to do that, you sometimes want to create the context and the environment. So there's letters written by John Adams and Samuel Adams, by a farmer, by a reverend that talk about the environment at the time. So a lot of those were really critical. Revere did have a few letters that he wrote to his wife that were also valuable, but a lot of it came from outside sources.
And what surprised you the most about Paul Revere?
Um, there's a few things. I guess the idea I mentioned those men, the Adamses, Hancock, Warren, and Dawes too. They were generally men and women who, those guys. They all went to Roxbury Latin School, and then they went to Harvard. Warren was a prominent doctor. They were great thinkers. Dawes' family had been here since the 1630s, been in the United States since the 1630s, like part of the original settlers. Revere, his dad came over in 1715, speaking French, had to learn English. Revere, born here, son of a French immigrant, didn't go, he went to essentially a trade school, certainly didn't go to college. And that he sort of, by dint of work and discipline and creativeness, he held many different jobs. He was an engraver, a silversmith, a self-trained dentist. I don't know if I personally would want to go to a self-trained dentist, but that's what he did. And many other things. By dint sort of his hard work and ingenuity, got himself really right next to the corridors of power and was working alongside them, so to speak. He pretty much took his bidding from them for the most part, but he and Warren particularly were very close. Paul Revere named one of his sons, Joseph Warren. So that was impressive to me, the way he sort of slipped the bounds of class to exert some real power and influence on the goings on at the start of this whole thing.
What is next for you in your writing?
I don't have the next book. I have a few things I'm thinking about. Yeah, my day job, I work at Dotdash Meredith, do a lot of special editions for Time Magazine, People Magazine, Life magazines, and others. And thinking about the next book.
Well, the book out now is The Ride, Paul Revere and the Night That Saved America. The author, Kostya Kennedy. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Steve. Great to be on with you.
Thank you. And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast.